All right, great. Welcome to Philadelphia, where it is in fact always sunny. We have 2 days of beautiful weather for you. Hopefully everybody made it in without too much drama. I was dreading what was going to happen with flights and everything else, but it seems like the travel was fairly smooth. So welcome. I think we've got a great couple of days of papers. We've got a great dinner tonight at the Barnes Foundation, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. So actually, I think I'll even kick off with that. So tonight's dinner, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but it's a pretty fascinating place for those of you that aren't familiar with it. It's at the Barnes Foundation, which is a museum that's only been in place about 12 years. But it was out in the suburbs for a long time and then just moved to the city. And the founder was a guy named Alfred Barnes. He was born in the slums of Philadelphia. His father had lost his arm to gangrene in the Civil War, and he wasn't able to support his family, so there wasn't much to go around. I think he had 2 siblings, both of which died in childbirth. So he had a pretty rough upbringing. But he was a sharp kid, and he attended the Philadelphia Central High School, which was sort of open to boys of superior intelligence, if you will. So he went there. He went on to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, got a degree in pharmacology. He developed a compound called, and I'm going to butcher the name, but Argerol, which is apparently a topical antiseptic, which solved a lot of issues with a lot of other antiseptics at the time. Apparently they were too harsh. This one was more mild. It took off. He started collecting art in 1912, and he held art appreciation lessons in the factory for his staff, many of which were women and African Americans, which hiring was frowned upon at the time, but Mr. Barnes didn't care. Production stopped for 2 hours a day so that he could teach them about art in his factory. In 2022, he bought a 12-acre arboretum in Marion, which is a beautiful suburb just outside of the city. He built a residence and a gallery out there and set it up to educate people about art. And so he really was passionate about education, not just putting pictures on the walls, but actually showing people what the sort of background was that sort of led to this, that led to that. And so in his museum, he would have art dating back hundreds or even thousands of years to show some of the sort of early sort of inspirations for what he had a super passion for, and that was Impressionist art. So he gave free art lessons out there. He continued to collect. Miraculously, for those of us, given that this is an accounting and business group, he miraculously sold his business in July of 1929. So for those, we only have a few people here that remember that date. For those of you that don't, that was 3 months before the stock market crash in 1929. He sold the business for $6 million, which inflation adjusted is about $120 million today. He died in 1951. The museum was out in the suburbs up until 2012. It gained popularity, so when he was buying all this Impressionist art, it was not particularly in favor. It obviously became more in favor. More and more people wanted to see the art. The first time my wife Eileen and I went out there, and many people from Philadelphia, maybe even some visitors have done this, but it's in this sort of residence that he set up 100 years ago, and everything is really cramped and crowded, and they could only get about, I forget, maybe 100 people a day or 200 people a day through the museum because it was set up as a residence and in small scale. And so they got to the point where the throughput was just, the demand was so high, and they wanted the art to be shown to more people. And so there was a big litigation over this, which I won't spare you, but if you find it interesting, it is fascinating. But they eventually moved the museum to Philadelphia, right with our other museums, right near the Rodin Museum, right near the Museum of Art, right on Ben Franklin Parkway. It's a fantastic space. It's the largest collection of Impressionist art masterpieces outside of Paris. For example, it has the largest Renoir collection in the world. Its estimated worth is about $25 billion. So, given that art heists is in fashion these days, you have about 10 hours to plan for your heist. So that's this evening. It's going to be fascinating. I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that, as some of you may have heard, this is my last year at Penn, so I am retiring at the end of this year. So some people might be surprised. So just to kind of squash the rumor mill, there is no backstory here. I am not ill. I'm not sort of mad at the university. I'm not sick of my colleagues, or at least most of them. So there's no story there. It's been an amazing 30 years at Penn. It's been an honor and a privilege to be part of this business school, and what has been, I think, an extraordinarily consistently high-quality accounting department over the last 25 years, and with minimal or no drama. Okay, so the drama we have here is, Rick ate all the cookies at lunch. Lucy fudges his score on the golf course, things like that. That's the drama here. Don't look at me, Luke. Where's Lucy? You know you do it. So it's been great. It's also been a privilege to sort of work with you guys through the journal, but also through conferences and workshops and dinners and all those sorts of things. So it's been great for me, and I've really enjoyed it. But I will be looking forward to enjoying the next thing. So have a great couple of days in Philadelphia, and let's get started with the first paper. Oh, one other thing. In case you were interested, I am intending to continue my stint as an editor of the journal. So my term runs out at the end of 2027. So I still have more than 2 years left. That's my own personal insurance policy to make sure people don't shoot me in the back when I leave the chain, knowing that I'll still be reviewing their papers. Okay, so let's get started. I think Joanna is doing the first one. Okay, so we have... we're trying to try to be on a very strict time schedule, so we'll have the 10 minutes. We'll have the 5 minutes. We'll have the 1 minute. And we'll have the zip it. So let's not get to the zip it. All right, Joanna, take it away.
Thank you so much. Let's get started with the first paper. Daniel, you have 20 minutes to present. And Andres, the discussant, has 20 to 25 minutes to discuss, and followed by Q&A. And it's all yours.
Guys, anyone can help me out here with the display settings?
Yep.
Swap.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for the JE editors for including our paper at the conference, and particularly to Professor Maydew for the guidance, and along with very useful comments and suggestions that essentially improve our work. This is a joint work of one-C, Evgeny from Tel Aviv University, and Chura from Tsinghua University. So before I start talking about auditing smart contracts, let's figure out what we are not talking about. So we are not talking about the Big Four, and we are not talking about the financial statements. So what we are looking here, we are looking to codes. More importantly, the codes that are serving to centralized finance, which is a technology that's providing a large range of services such as borrowing, lending, exchanges, insurance, yield farming, which is a type of bond investment or a passive income. And something that's also interesting is all the types of services such as predicting markets. So we look into this. This is a betting platform where I looked it up before taking a flight from Singapore to here. This is when the government will shut down the wind because I was concerned whether the flights would be delayed or canceled. There are other types of services too, tokenized assets and stable coins, which is a market that usually we treat separately. This is a large market with $300 to $400 billion in market capitalization. And much more due to the composability of smart contracts and the creativity of developers' teams. So here's to give you a sense of this market in terms of evolution, which started in early 2020, 2021. This variable is capturing in the blue line total value locked in dollars, which is the total value of services that will go through this smart contract. So imagine it is analogous to a GDP measure for the productivity of a country. There's an initial phase of excitement, and then a market crash, maturation phase, and now we can see very clearly uptrends, which reflects the crypto adoption, smart contracts adoption, and more participation in financial systems across the world. And today we're sitting about $150 to $180 billion in total value locked. Well, the downside of this is that all these assets and contracts, they are running online on the blockchains. So there is a severe cybersecurity risks exposures, as where hackers, they can essentially find bugs on these smart contracts. They can also find some backdoors to withdraw some of these funds that are staked there and some irregularities. In fact, there are more than $8 billion in total of hacking losses across these years that are attributed to flaws in these smart contracts. So here's an outline. Get your mic down. Sure. Can you hear me better now? Oh, okay. Well, nobody said anything.
I did.
Thank you very much. Nobody that's not retiring soon. So this is an outline for today's presentation. I'll introduce you the setting. Then we're going to look into the differences between centralized and decentralized audits. And there are three types of research questions we are interested in. First one is audit choice, essentially which auditors to engage. Second is whether auditing is actually effective in preventing future security breaches. And third, what happens given a breach occur for both the DeFi teams that are affected in their respective auditors in terms of reputation management. So, and I have only 20 minutes. So let's start from the data collection. We've been working on collecting data in this paper for almost 3 years. We have several sources of data. First one is the audit level. We're taking from official repositories and auditing firms, blockchain security aggregators, and public code bases such as GitHub. The coverage is almost 10,000 auditing reports for more than 100 firms. It's very concentrated and highly competitive market. There are also the centralized auditors, which we'll introduce you in a moment. About the protocol level characteristics in blockchain, there are several variables that we use. We are focusing especially on some of them that capture some riskiness of this protocol, because the riskier the protocol is, more likely is to seek for external assurance. For instance, oracles. Oracles are very important because most of these DeFi protocols, they are running on a blockchain. A blockchain is an isolated system. So if you want to capture information that's coming from the real world, you need an oracle, which is a bridge that will make that data in between the two systems. So for instance, the predicting markets, we need to feed with information about real world events. We have other data that we're capturing here, including a million lines of coding and the social media activity from X platform. And all this data, we merge in it into 4,108 unique DeFi protocols. Now, DeFi protocol is a term we're going to use as an analogous to a small firm that is running, that's main product is a digital platform. So that's a DeFi protocol. And those platforms being launched between January 2020 and January 2025. And of course, we also create a data set on security breaches with hundreds of DeFi exploits. So here is an example of an auditing report. This is by Hacking. Hacking is one of the big four that we have in this market. And here is a report for Binance proof of reserves. So you can see it's quite technical. They find some critical flaw in the smart contract. They suggest some fixes. Here is the GitHub repository for this report, which is publicly available. Any one of you can go there and download this repository's information. And usually the reporting has a summary at the end where it enumerates the number of bugs found and how critical they are, how severe they are. Doesn't stop there. Usually the auditor will sit with the DeFi team and kind of try to resolve these issues. Now, there's a large variation in the quality of these auditors. First, you can see that there are disclaimers all around. They say that they are not liable to post-auditing protocol issues. On top of that, there's an absence of regulation and reinforcement. So one of the main issues in this setting is that ex-ante quality is not verifiable. Well, the second type of auditor we're interested in is called decentralized auditors. This one, the quality is verifiable because that is a platform where there are freelancers. Those are computer scientists and engineers that will provide auditing and try to fix these bugs. So the DeFi teams can come to this platform, list a certain amount of money, let's say $100,000, that's going to be paid upon performance of these freelancers. And this is a leaderboard. You can access information on these bounty hunters or decentralized auditors. You're going to use that term interchangeably in this presentation. You can see there the protocols that they worked before, how many bugs they found, and even how much money they made. In terms of timeline, the protocol, the teams will work on the smart contract and will deploy on the blockchain. Before that happens is usually where the centralized auditor is going to do the code revision for a fixed fee. And here are some of the top-tier auditors in our data set, Certic and Haken. And the decentralized auditors, they will operate mostly in the post-deployment phase. So this is in a live environment where the freelancers will be stress testing and providing security assurance for these protocols. They are paid upon performance fee based on the number of bugs they find and how severe they are. And some of the top platform for bounty hunters, Code4N and Immunify. So here is the first question that we analyze, which auditor to engage. We're going to be looking first at the static determinants of auditor choice. We're going to have a logit regression for column 1 and multinomial logic regression for column 2 and 3, with column 1 being audit versus non-audit, column 2 and 3, top tier auditor, bottom tier auditor, and non-audit, where top tier is going to be classified based on the market share of this auditor, similar to what we do with the Big Four. Across this analysis, we find consistent results suggesting that protocols with higher ex-ante complexity and risk exposure, they're more likely to engage or seek assurance for a top-tier auditor in this space, consistent with trying to prevent some future security breaches. In terms of dynamic determinants, we're going to be examining some of the major hack episodes that happen in this market. Those are systemic hacks. So this is, for instance, Poly Network is a $600 million that the hacker managed to withdraw from Poly Network, which is a service of cross-bridge interoperability that affects several of these protocols, hundreds of them. And what you can see is that once that systemic event happens, it reveals a new source of risk that these DeFi teams have to be aware of. And in terms of, you see the probability of choosing a top auditor, it increases the red line for protocols that have an oracle in place. So these protocols that have an oracle in place, they have a component that will enable this protocol to have access to external data, and so they are similar in fragility as the systemic risk. So that creates an awareness for these DeFi teams to seek extra assurance, which shows that the market is very dynamic. Every time there's a new vulnerability, there's a new type of auditor that the market tried to find. Great. We also put that into an regression on the stacked difference in differences, and you can see here that protocols that are riskier than the others, when there is a systemic event, in this we have the major 6 systemic events throughout the period, they are more likely to hire a top-tier auditor and move away from a bottom-tier auditor. Now, we also look into whether centralized and decentralized auditors works as a substitute or complement. Most of the time, they work as a complement. There is a positive correlation in the time series of number of centralized audits and decentralized audits. What you see in the red line is the number of decentralized audits, and the dashed line, vertical lines are the systemic events. There's often a surge for bounty hunters once there's some systemic risk. We also analyze that in a different designs. What you see in the first row is protocols that are riskier, whether they're adopting decentralized auditors or looking for bounty hunters once there's a big hack event in this system, which is consistent with seeking extra external assurance. However, if they are currently in the interaction of the top, if they are currently audited by a top-tier auditor, they are less likely to seek decentralized audits. So top-tier auditors and decentralized audits can work as substitutes. Now, this result comes as a caveat that some of these top-tier auditors, such as CERTIC, also start providing some types of bounty hunting programs towards the end of our time series. All right, so understanding the choices and the types of auditors, we look into whether auditing actually can help these DeFi teams to prevent future security breaches. So first thing you're going to do, we are inspired, of course, by the traditional auditing literature where audit quality could prevent the likelihood of future misstatements. We translate it to our setting that audit coding quality could prevent future security breaches. We start with an extensive margin where we are looking to any audit. We are not looking to quality yet. Any audit is, of course, the decision to audit is endogenous. So, and we show in the determinants analysis that most of it is correlated with protocol characteristics. So we have to match the two groups, the one that audit and the one that does not. And when we do so, we find no relation between auditing with any auditor and preventing future security breaches, consistent with most of these auditors being of lower quality. So this result is actually not surprising for us. I'm still not talking in the microphone. I hope you can hear me. The result is not surprising for us because, as I said, there is a large variation in audit quality. You can see here, this is a sample of the vulnerabilities per report found across these more than 100 auditors. The right tail suggests that there's a dispersion in auditor quality. So the average of any auditor will be a poor auditor quality. So a more interesting question is whether quality picked by top-tier auditors could actually prevent future security breaches. So we're going to look at an intensive margin. We're going to show a naive regression here. It's important. That's a kind of Angry's textbook where we want to show the direction of endogeneity, because even if I pick a top-tier auditor, it means my DeFi protocol is very risky already. For being very risky already, I would choose a top-tier auditor, and I'll be more likely to be hacked in the future. So we have to deal with this simple task of dealing with endogeneity in the setting. Not simple, I'm kidding. We're going to be, inspired by Armstrong et al. 2022 and causa redux. We're going to be triangulating several empirical approaches trying to mitigate endogeneity. Of course, I don't have time to show off them. So I'm going to show one, which is going to be using an instrumental variable with the release of ChatGPT as an exogenous technological shock. The idea here is that generative AI can help these teams to improve their audit quality, their coding quality. So that would work as a substitute for the costly hiring a top-tier auditor. We don't only rely on intuition and the literature, we also test it ourselves to see if indeed the developers in this market are using the tool. And here is using ChatGPT outages, and this developer team's production of code on GitHub platform, you can see a substantial significant impact in the days that the ChatGPT is disrupted, is not working. To that help us with the relevance of this instrument, the exclusion restriction is plausible. Here's the results. In the first stage, indeed, there is substitution between the demand for top-tier auditors post-ChatGPT launch. But what we are seeking here is the second stage. We're doing a better job in trying to address endogeneity concerns. Choosing a top-tier auditor is negatively correlated with the future security breach. We try other results. We have robustness checks. We have a Bartik IV2, which is a step up from IV, using the shift as the exposure of the protocol to the benefit of using ChatGPT at the blockchain level, and the share as how much activity this protocol has across several blockchains. Translating it to Bartik means one firm has many activities across industries, and that's the share that we have. And in that exercise, we still have the same results, suggesting that choosing a top-tier auditor indeed is associated with a lower likelihood of future breaches. For the bounty hunters and decentralized auditors, we find the similar results, again, suggesting that if you choose a decentralized auditor, you also have a less likely of having a future security breaches. This is our last question. We're going to look into what happens post-breach for both DeFi teams and their auditors. There's a lot of information we can use about it, more than $8 billion in hack events, both at the DeFi level and at the systemic risk level. What I do here, we do a logit regression, whether the team is going to switch their auditor once they face a hacking episode. So just as like a firm would drop their auditor if that auditor is related with some financial scandal. We do see that this is indeed the case. There's a high likelihood of switching the auditor. We also test the direction that they are switching these auditors to, whether this is a top to a top tier, a top to bottom, which is a downgrade, or a bottom to top, an upgrade. This is what you find as a result, and also from non-audit to top. So there's an upgrade of the auditor quality once these protocols suffer a security breach. The same we do for decentralized auditors, and again, they're more likely to switch for a decentralized audit and moving from a bottom-tier centralized auditor to a decentralized auditor. Let me just show you the last piece of information we have on our paper, which are examining the Poly network, where coincidentally the three top-tier, big three auditors in this market were auditing this firm. This is their market share. You can see that all their market shares are negatively affected by the system, by the hack event. Most of these auditors lose about 30 to 50%. They can recover some of it. The blue line is Certic. It's able to manage the crisis very well by having a rapid response and working with Poly network throughout the crisis. And that makes Certic to recover part of the market share, suggesting that if the auditor wants to keep their client and manage their reputation, they can do it very well in this market. Importantly, when you put that to generalize the results in a cross-section of auditors and hacks, we see that indeed the effect is short-lived. However, a 4.5 percentage point decrease is about 20% loss in market share. Let me conclude. So what we show here, we show that we investigate auditing for smart contracts. We find that risk protocols are more likely to hire top-tier quality or decentralized auditors, and they work mostly as complements, but can also be substitutes when there's a systemic event. Once the selection is addressed, we find the top-tier quality indeed decreases future breaches. More importantly, in the post-hack episodes, protocols, they upgrade to top-tier or to decentralized audits, and affected auditors suffer short-term market losses contingent on how they manage the crisis. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward for the discussion comments and the audience questions. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right. Normally I'm loud enough, but let's take the microphone anyway. All right, everyone. So I'm Andreas Park. I'm from the U of T. Thanks for having me here. It's the first time I'm actually ever presenting in front of accountants, so it's going to be an interesting experience. My instructions from them, it was that I should give a very general overview, and I should try to introduce you also to the field of blockchain, DeFi, and why this paper matters. And so I'm going to spend probably most of my talk on the general materials, and then some of the time also obviously on this paper, but I've already sent the authors my comments on this, and also the editor of the journal, so they're aware of this too. But I will spend a fair bit of time on the general components here. And in particular, what I want to accomplish here to some degree is I want you to get interested in this field and to understand why it is something that you should care about and why you should at least keep an eye on what's going on in this space. And I really want to also get out of this a few take-homes, which is that when we think of this field of DeFi and blockchain, it is not about Bitcoin. It's not about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and blowing up an exchange and losing billions of dollars. It's not about what Binance and Coinbase are doing. It's not about Ripple or JP Morgan or Trump coin, Fat coin, or other wild speculation. This is not what I'm trying to, why you should be interested in this. And so let's start with a very simple question. So what is blockchain? What is DeFi? Now, I would like you to think about a blockchain, again, not in terms of Bitcoin, right? I would like to think for you to think about it as a financial infrastructure. And now, setting aside what a blockchain is and what it does, if we take a step back and we think about how our markets and finance are organized, and if we could restart from scratch, I don't think we would build the world as it is today. Right? So it's not even clear to me that we would actually have even banks. Right? So this is a bit controversial maybe, but it's not clear to me that a bank is the best way how we can organize credit and lending and payments. Right? Now it might well be, but unless I've seen a theory paper on that, I'm not believing it. And I think this is maybe one of the ways how you should also think about it. And the blockchain is in a way how we can maybe reimagine it. So let's start with some very, very broad and simple overview. And forget about banks for a moment. Just think about our various different pieces of financial infrastructure. So in finance, we do a lot of different things, and they somehow have to all work together. So we have payments that runs on a particular type of rail. We have stocks, they run on a different rail. We have options, bonds, again, it's a different mechanism. Futures have a completely different setup. Then we have all kinds of derivatives instruments, swaps, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligation, mortgage-backed securities, all of that run on different rails in different types of infrastructure. And so they're all siloed, and we then use financial institutions to jerry-rig them together, often with a lot of duct tape. So if we could do this from scratch again, how would we do this? Well, obviously, what we would do is we would pick everything on one single infrastructure. Now, I'm from Canada, and I know that if this would ever happen, obviously the US wants to run it, I can tell you, right? Not going to happen for us, right? But so there's all kinds of problems that you have when you create a single infrastructure run by a big firm. And I would like you to also keep this in mind, because I think one of the biggest challenges, and not because of blockchain or for blockchain, but actually for us, is that we will see, and there's currently a movement by some major fintech firms to become it, like the infrastructure for everything. I find that a very scary prospect. And I think we should all be worried about that we're creating some big behemoths that control the way how our financial infrastructure works, and thereby put themselves in a position where they can extract tons of rent. Now, but what I want to say is this, is like, okay, so you can't have a single infrastructure, right? We cannot agree on a single one which is run by some firm or even by a government. But a blockchain is the next best thing. Right? So the Ethereum blockchain is a public infrastructure, in a way, public in the sense of it's accessible, commonly usable, permissionless, accessible to anyone, that can actually accomplish many of the tasks that we're actually looking for, just a little bit like the internet. So now what is a blockchain really? So I say that this is an infrastructure. Fundamentally what it is a network of physical computers and a process that links them together in such a way that you take this network of computers to work as a single computer in the sky. So it's a simulated virtual machine that can then accomplish any kind of database operations that we need. And fundamentally, a lot of what we do in finance is database operations, right? Shifting money from one to another, somebody owes something to somebody, conditional payments, and so on and so forth. Right? Now, there's a little bit more too. Which is, if you think about our traditional financial world, everything in the traditional financial world is intermediated. And in the sense of that, if you want to do anything financing related, with the exception of cash, of course, or moving physical items around, which is not a thing anymore, we have to go through some form of intermediary. So, and what the intermediaries therefore do is they give us access to the financial infrastructure. There's advantages for that. There's safeguards built in, but there's also some restrictions coming with this and some limitations of what can be done. But if you want to control a financial asset, you need to use an intermediary. Decentralized finance breaks this up. Essentially what happens in decentralized finance is that you don't have necessary intermediaries. You can choose to go through an intermediary. Like this is where the role of Coinbase and Binance is, right? So there are intermediaries that help you with things. But you can also do the operations directly using the infrastructure, right? So now directly means that you're accessing applications that are referred to as as smart contracts. And to be very clear, a smart contract, there's nothing smart about them. It's really a dumb contract because it's really just a piece of code that's running. But it is a tool that you can access in order to do some form of operation. Now, let me say this in a nutshell. So I think what is critical and what's different about the world of decentralized finance versus traditional finance is these 4 items. It's the self-control, and we call it self-custody, which means like you can hold the assets yourself and control them. Essentially, it means that you have an application on your phone or on your desktop that can then, send commands to this blockchain network, to the computer in the sky, and make it do something. This is what we refer to as self-custody. There is unfiltered access to the infrastructure, so anybody can directly perform operations, financial operations, with the tools that they have. They don't have to get permission or the help from an intermediary. And there is free entry of service providers in this world. Now, this is actually very important because essentially what you get is what people in Silicon Valley like to call permissionless innovation. This is in the financial world something which is very uncommonly thought of because normally when we think in finance, everything is in some form permission. So somebody has to give approval before you can do it. Whereas if you think of the Silicon Valley world, they're thriving on the idea of they don't ask for permission for anything what they want to do. And this is very special actually even in the world, right? So if you look anywhere outside of the US, oftentimes for any business activity, you need a permit before you can actually do the business activity. And this is now extending this idea and this process to the world of finance. Now, the fourth point is that this leads to it's a very big word that I use. It's conceptually non-custodial services. Means basically non-custodial just means that there is a service or an application that runs, and you use assets to do it. And I'll give you examples in a minute. But you don't hand over control. Right? So hand over control in the sense of that somebody can take your assets and just run with them. Right? So in some sense, you always have the ability to go back to this particular application, using the computer in the sky, send a command and say, give me my money back. And this application, conditional on how it's set up, can't do anything about it. Right? So whereas if you have to go to your bank and say, I want my money back, well, they can tell you they may not give it to you. And if you think this is not the case, I actually had a case like this where my mother's bank wouldn't give me my inheritance for about 6 months for no particular reason. So if you think it doesn't happen, it does happen, trust me. Anyway, and so one part, though, that is really important that I'm going to come to is this part here where it runs autonomously on the infrastructure. Autonomously means there's a set of commands, and these computers in the sky, or the computer in the sky, processes these commands, conditional on the commands being, allowed under the conditions of the operating system, if you want. Okay, I sound a little techier than it probably is. So now the key part is these are the features, and there are consequences that come from it. And the 2 consequences, I think makes it interesting, is number 1 is that this blockchain, or this network, if you want, is a common resource, which can be accessed and used by anybody. Could be used by people, could be used by existing financial institutions, by regulators, by criminals. Anybody is basically available there to use it. And the services that run on this, they operate as platforms. So very much differently from our normal consumer or client-customer relationship. You have really a platform where you bring people together. Now, this particular paper falls into this part of the fourth. Where you have conceptually non-custodial services, autonomous codes on the blockchain. Which brings me, that was supposed to say, actually, what is special about smart contracts. Okay, let's talk about these smart contracts for a moment. So what are they? It's a piece of code that performs operations on a blockchain, so that it instructs the computers to do a particular operation. It can be called by anyone, can be deployed by anyone. It's organized as a platform, often requires, and this is where it becomes important, requires the deposits of some form of asset and often involves transfers of assets. So now, one thing that you hear, and I want to make this crush this misconception, is the term it's immutable. Right? So you hear that people deploy a piece of code and it cannot be changed. That is generally a false statement, and it's a false way to think about it. The code that exists, that is deployed, that's essentially immutable, that's correct. But oftentimes these codes are just a wrapper that points to something else, to a version of another code that can then be changed and operates. And sometimes the codes themselves have some triggers that under a certain set of with a certain commands can actually be changed. So let me give you an example. You may have heard, I'm assuming you have never heard of anything, but there is a decentralized platform for trading. It's called Uniswap. Uniswap allows liquidity providers and liquidity demanders to meet. It creates what's called a liquidity pool. It's a very efficient way to organize trading. And in its original implementation, Uniswap itself, like the entity that created the contract, would not earn a single penny from anything that happens with this smart contract. So they deployed it, and they allowed it to run, and then people could use it. They had no control over how it was used, and they didn't earn a single penny on it. Right? So that's essentially, this is where it was completely immutable, and was basically there for the public. Now there was a trigger, which is a particular fee which they could pay themselves. And that fee was essentially set to 0. But recently they triggered it so that there's now a little fee that is being paid to Uniswap itself. So much for the immutability, right? So there was little changes that you can make that are built in, but you can also have a different, that can be switched on and off. But other than that, this code runs autonomously. But there's also other versions where basically a code is a wrapper and it points to a particular software piece that runs elsewhere. So an example is you heard of stablecoins. So stablecoins is USDC. This is the one issued by Circle. It's essentially the specimen for the stablecoins that came from the Genius Act. That is something that can be changed, and it has to be changed, and there's some codes and components of it that can be changed over time. All right, so I gave you a few examples just now in my little speech. We have liquidity pools for trading, borrowing, and lending. At the end of the day, a bank is also just a liquidity pool for borrowing and lending. They collect money and they lend it out, right? You can use smart contracts, these tools, as collateral for derivatives, for borrowing and lending, for securing services, and so on and so forth. Now, here's the problem. Funds stolen by DeFi attackers have amounted to almost $6 billion by now. This is the cumulative amount. So a lot of money has been lost here. So what's happening here? Let me give you some examples. One example was something called Cream Finance. Cream Finance is a particular lending pool. And so somebody it relied on a service which is called an oracle. An oracle takes data from outside of the contract, puts it into the contract, and determines some conditions of an exchange. And somebody was able to spend $10 million to manipulate an oracle to think that the price of an item was not $1, but $2, and thereby was then able to borrow against a certain amount of collateral that they have provided, which was now worth $2 as opposed to the real price, which was $1. And that allowed them to extract something on the order of $130 million. Right? So by tricking the contract and the logic of the code into thinking something is what it really isn't, they were able to attract a lot of money. Another one is there was an attack on the infrastructure where somebody basically deliberately put in a piece of code which was invalid. That invalid code led to rejection of an operation, but in the process of the rejection, the contract or the system revealed information that it shouldn't have revealed, and that allowed the attacker then to extract funds from otherwise hidden transactions. The last thing is this just happened last week. There's a decentralized trading platform called Balancer, and they found out that there's a particular problem with rounding. So for very, very, very small numbers, there is a part where the operation, the price being paid rounds to 0, but transactions still occur at a positive quantity. And so that allowed somebody, again, to extract something of $113 million worth of tokens. So what I'm trying to get here is these are very, very subtle attacks. So the problems that arise are very, very tricky to find out. And they're very hard to anticipate. But when they happen usually at scale, and they happen also incredibly quickly. So some of these exploits happen in a single transaction. So now, what are common fault lines? I gave you an example. Sometimes the transfers don't work under all circumstances because of rounding errors. You have reliance on oracles, which external processes to feed information in. They can be manipulated. There's other problems. Applications that you may create could be used in unexpected manners. So there's a lending application called Aave, where another group of people built an application on top of that, and that building on top of this created very significant risk that was not accounted for in the original application. And then there could be, the counterpoint is your application may depend on somebody else's code, and because the code is not immutable but can be changed subtly by pointing to a different version of a code, your application may fail or some operations may no longer work. So there's a lot of problems that can happen. It's very, very hard to anticipate all of them. Now, in many ways, this is not new. Right? So software always has bugs. Most of us have done some form of coding, and once the code exceeds the page, you're going to have an error in there. Right? So this is not something that we haven't seen before. But in blockchain, it's different. Right? So when you have a cyber attack, normally there's an indirect cost, a reputation loss, data gets lost, people get upset. But it's very rarely, you may lose secrets and all, but you very rarely lose money directly. Whereas in a blockchain, the customer itself is directly exposed and directly loses money and often loses a lot of money, and it's just gone. Right? It's irretrievable. There's no court or regulator that can force a repayment. You can, if you know who the person is, you can obviously hold them in contempt and make them do it. But other than that, knowing directly who that person is, it's very, very hard to recover the funds. And there's also the question of accountability. Right? So, how do we deal with this? Who's actually on the hook for this? So this paper is in this realm and tries to make a contribution, tries for us to understand the decision to determine to have a code review and also whether or not it matters. Now, I use the word, I try to avoid the use audit here because audit has a very specific meaning, I understand, in accounting. This is a code review formally. It's the term audit is, however, what is used in the blockchain industry for it. So just to be very clear, it's not like Daniel and his course has invented that term. But it's about a code review. Right? But the mechanisms are very similar to audits in a sense of there's a signaling value, for instance, to it. Okay. Now, why is this really big and important? This is Paul Atkins, head of the SEC. He made an announcement in July 31st and said, essentially, we want to move America's capital markets on-chain. So this is happening, whether you want it or not. So here's my overall, let me say my overview of the paper. This has it is already a big topic. It is a very big business. It becomes even more important in the policy debate. We need to think about standards, processes, what level of resilience has to be required, accountability, by whom, to whom, the legality of it, what are the criteria for these audit firms? There's so many questions out there that are for practical relevance. I don't even know where to start. This paper is very nice. It's well developed, has enormous amount of data work, and it captures and addresses many of the very important questions in the code review. Daniel was very fast about it, but the different questions, the three that he addressed, essentially are the questions that we would ask ourselves. It's also quite clear in the way it's written in terms of the endogeneity concerns that are there, but it's still worthwhile, doing the kind of work. So this very likely will become a reference text and will attract hundreds of citations. So for the journals, this is obviously a good thing, right? Okay, so now very quickly, as I said, I wanted to do mostly overview stuff, but I want to also say a few things about the paper. We had 3 questions. Who asked for a review? What type of review do they ask for? Is it effective? And what happens if something goes wrong after? Okay, so very briefly, so when do you do the review? You can do it before launch, so you can have a brand new version, or you can have an update of your version. You have a review. You can do it after the launch too, where bad things may have happened to others, or bad things can happen to you when you have to look for other problems that can arise. And of course, there's other circumstances matter too, because also the timing and time matters, like what has happened in the world before you. And you can see this already is a very complex problem that they kind of have to address in their empirical design. What kind of code review could you do? You could do a code audit firm, which could be high and pricey or unknown and cheap. or you can do a decentralized bug program. Essentially, just basically put out your code and say, hey, go crazy, find me my errors, right? Now, you just from an economist perspective, there's so many modeling questions that you have, like these decentralized programs have participation constraints and concerns that you have, competition. If there's not enough competition, you may find a bug, but you won't want to tell anybody, but exploit it later. There's so many questions that you can have there. There's many papers that can be written on this. Okay, let's start with the audit demand. Who seeks an audit? The paper tells us it's oracles, bridges, cross-chain designs where you have to do something across different blockchains. Lending and borrowing is a very big topic, so those firms that try to do lending, do a lending logic in some form, do audit reviews. Who picks top-tier firms? Well, the larger, more visible protocols. And what happens after an exploit? Well, systemic hacks. So that's one that not necessarily affect yourself, but somebody else in your area of operation, increase the demand for high reputation audits. It seems all actually completely reasonable. I mean, so one example here is this very pretty graph. I like those, where you have, the unaffected and then the affected. And so if you are affected and there's a jump up, this is always great. I like good, nice picture, right? It tells for a good story. Let me give you some niggles here. So the first thing is some of these covariates have a bit of a hindsight feel to it, right? We say, people with oracles choose to be, to be audited, but this vulnerability definition is really exposed, right? We do make a decision of what is vulnerable from the perspective of 2025 and look at the data from 2022. AMMs, for instance, automated market makers, were not on the list of vulnerable, but we now know that they're also vulnerable, right? So I find the definition there is a little tricky, right? So the question is, can you find something more contemporaneous, like documentation flags, omissions of statements, and so on? The term larger is also used. Right? Now, larger is essentially by the total value that goes into the contract, but that's really hard to separate from the audit, right? Because if you do an audit with a very expensive firm and it comes out well, then you may attract more capital. So TVL always stands by the amount of deposits, right? So can we not use maybe something which is less endogenous, like revenue predictions, testnet activity of some form, intended funding, stuff like that? Okay, getting there. Then there's a question of being listed, for instance. Having the amount that you raise and being listed on something like Binance is very expensive. You have to bribe them with $1 million to get listed on Binance, right? So you need to be well funded for that. So it's kind of, there's again, sort of like, overlap there. And then there's question, they also use GitHub commits, so how many times have you put code in there? I'm going to point Daniel to his own work on code washing, because that's relevant here too. Okay, now there's a variable I like to see, which is that these projects often copy from one another. There's literally in the code base, literally in the code of the smart contract, which anybody can read, is actually references of the original one. So I think I would like to see more of that, because that we want to avoid that we over-attribute low-tier exploits to low-tier reviewers from projects that are already copied. Right? So maybe originality would be one of the terms that we want to use. Okay, I think I'm going to skip over some of the other things because I'm out of time. But I just want to, maybe I want to show this, right? So how good is it actually? Is it actually effective? And I think this is I plotted this here. It's basically what's the probability distribution of being addressed? To me, it's like if you have been reviewed versus not reviewed, there seems to be a first-order stochastic dominance relation here, right? Meaning that if you have been reviewed, you survive for longer without being hacked. And because most of the hacks happen early, this is actually probably a very interesting result. I think they could actually have included that. So let me just say one more thing about that. Yeah, I'm here. Kept me off the stage. All right. So look, there's a question about what kind of program do you pick, right? So now in this particular paper, it's like the way it's a little difficult to read because in principle, you can do, you can pick a expensive, and you can pick a non-expensive, and you can pick a bug bounty program. You can do all three of them if you want, right? So it's difficult to figure out from the writing whether it's exclusive or it's just in the set of programs that you pick. And importantly, so this bug bounty program is often operated also by some of the high value, very expensive auditing firms themselves. So they actually cooperate with them, number one. And number two, the there's other reasons why you want to do a bug bounty program. It could be just a marketing effect, right? You set out, here's $100,000 that we have, and now go crazy on it. That may have nothing to do with you wanting to find bugs, but actually maybe about the promotion of the program. So you want to, in some form, maybe try to think if you can decompose that. Okay, so very last thing, and then I'm gone. So I want to start with something. This is really still very early. Now, we should all be grateful that these people in the DeFi world are willing to build several $1 billion worth of money, because effectively they're planting the way for this to be used maybe more seriously, right? So just so you see, where's the DeFi world? It started with Bitcoin in 2008, 2009. Along them came Ethereum, which is a general purpose infrastructure this is where the smart contracts came in. On 2017-18, we started thinking of stablecoins. So that's basically you have a settlement tool in order to actually do transactions on the blockchain. In 2020, we started seeing DeFi applications. And now in 2023 to 2025, people started actually seeing pretty serious and pretty interesting financial engineering applications. Okay? Now, this is what policy is now. They're dealing with the problems from 2017. Now, research is somewhere in 2022. Most of it. So as researchers, we're only about 4 years behind. Policy is about 8 years behind. Right? So you can see why we're even in our understanding are still very, very early. And so there's a lot of work to be done. So a lot of papers to be written on this too. Now, I would like to see that you treat blockchain as a serious attempt to make finance better, more efficient, more competitive, and cheaper and faster, right? As opposed to thinking about it just from the perspective of the criminals and the scammers on this world. Right? So that's maybe the one message that I want to get home. And with that, I stop before I get dragged off the stage. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just maybe 1 or 2 minutes to thanks Lyandres for the fantastic lecture. It was amazing, and the comments and suggestions that are well taken, and we're gonna definitely be working on those. Just 1 or 2 points about it. First, about the looking ahead bias, we have actually been back and forth with TVL for some time. I think we know that's addressable. We can, just report some columns without it. This is, I believe, the only variable we measure contemporaneously to launch, but that's excellent suggestions in relating to using code originality and forking. I really like it. Thank you for pushing the creativity there. And the second point I want to mention is about clarification on the bounty. I'm sorry we are not so clear. We definitely will be clear in the next version. What do we mean by bounty here are only programs that are run by bounty platforms. So if Certic is launching a bounty program, that will be included as a code review by a top-tier auditor. So just to make sure that we are looking to actually centralize versus decentralize, where decentralized are the bounty platforms. But thank you very much for all the great effort and all very good comments. Appreciate it. Hi.
Hi. Super interesting paper. Learned a lot. One thing I didn't learn, though, really, is why these markets are actually persisting, kind of the code review, audit. Because I see there's a lemons problem in the code, and then there's a lemon problem with the audit firms, right? Because how do we verify even that these audits are good? And so what I thought maybe might help you out at the beginning is think back, you talk a little bit about audit theory, but when I read those papers, they're really going back to Akerlof, Market for Lemons, right? And there's a lot of predictions out of that paper that could help you kind of position why in an unregulated world, because in 20 years it's going to be a new technology, but why in this market, or we can more generalize in markets where there's not lemon laws, there's not regulators, why these types of markets can appear and persist, and what allows them to function properly. I think your paper can actually speak to some of that, but you're kind of leaving that on the table right now.
Okay, should I address the question? Okay, yeah, so thank you very much, Chris, for the suggestion. I totally agree with you. Especially, there's a lot of dynamics throughout the period, right? When there's a new vulnerability, the market responds in a different way. and Poly network occurred in mid-2021. FBI only August 2022 made an announcement. A year, like you said about policy makers being late. Only a year after that, clarified for the DeFi users, you should look whether the platform that you are trading or using is actually audited. I do agree with you that Arcloth kind of theory could help us delivering at least better the predictions you have in the paper. We'll definitely make an effort in that direction. Take into account it's a very dynamic market. Like we have 4 years of data. It's almost like we're looking like for 30 years of capital market data, because every year something happens and the market changes totally. But we'll try to fit that story in this very dynamic market we have. But appreciate it for the suggestion. Thank you.
John Barrios and then Clyde.
John.
Yeah,
Hi.
very cool. Reading the paper to the point that I think the discussant made, it seems a lot of this is kind of a portfolio approach, whereas the paper's written like I can do decentralized or centralized, but you could have a case where you do at the beginning of the protocol, you have the centralized, and then you have for these bounty pro. Like, can you do a little bit more to kind of think of this as the simultaneous decision to do both of these things rather than independently? At least the tests seemed they were like independent.
Certainly, that's a great point. Indeed, especially in the last years, we see a combination of both, and that's actually our kind of main takeaway for the DeFi teams is you should use centralized auditors, top-tier quality ex ante before the protocol is deployed, and then you go for the bounty hunting in terms of providing continuous post-deployment kind of assurance. I think we stress mostly the substitution part, and you're right, we can also address the combination of both.
And the second point is there's a data. You have a footnote saying that sometimes these things aren't disclosed.
These things are not
The
disclosed.
protocol might not disclose the audit. Somewhere you're saying like.
Oh, we'll look into that footnote.
So these tend to be controls, and like if you don't see they disclose anything, you're going to treat them as them not getting an audit.
So that's tricky. You're right. Like that's why I call it voluntary audit. It's possible that some protocols will not disclose it, although I think very rarely, because there is a disclosure effect that's positive.
It attenuates, like when you start talking about how you don't find effects in the beginning and stuff like that. That footnote is basically saying you
yeah.
control.
Right.
They aren't getting audited.
That's
They
true.
might have gotten something, but not reported it.
Especially because at the beginning of this market, there weren't many auditors out there, and there's even some news out there showing that some of the main auditors, their clients were waiting for 4 to 5 months to get actually effective audit, right? So there is a kind of mismatch between demand and supply, particularly in the first year or first year and a half. But that's great. Yeah, sure. We're gonna put that on the paper. Thank you so much.
Clyde, so let's try to keep the questions short because you
That's good.
Clyde.
So
Hey.
I think the setting is fascinating. I particularly enjoyed reading about the bounty hunters.
Thank you.
I'm just kind of a little bit puzzled by your positioning of this as auditing. Right?
Oh.
These financial statement auditing, because we normally think of auditing as resolving principal agent problems. And I didn't really see
Code
a clear
reviews.
parallel here.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure whether what you're documenting is really auditing, or is it more like consulting?
Oh.
So if you could think about that, and then kind of related to that, when I'm reading through the paper and I'm looking at the citations, I saw almost no connection between what you'd say in a sentence and then the cited study. So, I think maybe you should have somebody review all your citations.
Okay.
But I think, especially if you're
We
going
need an auditor.
if you're going to have the impact that the discussant suggested, right?
Sure.
Hundreds of citations, and if you want to be taken seriously by the auditing research community, I
Sure.
think you need to, first of all, position it as to why it is auditing, and then secondly,
Of course.
make sure the
Okay. Comment well taken. We're going to definitely revise it. It's a very, very hard call to call it as auditing, as Andreas, and you know it, right? There's a code review. So perhaps that mismatch is an attempt of us to get closer to two, but probably did not do a good job. So thank you very much. We're gonna look into it. And by the way, I know there are excellent scholars in this room that have contributed to auditing, the traditional auditing literature, we take all your suggestions. Just shoot us an email. Whatever you find there that's not correct, we should adjust it. We appreciate it. Yeah.
So Hassan and Jeremy.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks very much for the paper. My question is whether you can observe the specific code that goes into the protocols in your sample. And the reason why is because I think if you can, it might be helpful to you in your tests where you're using the introduction of ChatGPT as an identification strategy, because your assumption there is that after ChatGPT, the code has less error, and so you don't need the auditor quite as much. But if you can look at the code, you can actually, I think, potentially see which code may be more likely to have been written using ChatGPT. And that might be helpful because insofar as ChatGPT is just pulling from prior code runs, do we actually know that it's more or less error prone?
Sure.
So that could be just a nice way to kind of get some cross-sectional variation in your code.
That's a great suggestion. We actually do an exercise where we use ChatGPT to do an auditing report to actually try to find bugs. That's in one of the appendix. I think we have like tons of appendix. Is in there. And we actually wanted to push more towards the areas. Just the paper started becoming super long. But that's definitely something we can look into. All the coding is publicly available. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. We should look into it.
Jeremy and then Travis.
So
Hi, Jeremy.
what's not being said is when the DeFi came to be, and even now, it's mostly margin investing. You over-collateralize, and then you use the extra money to lever up a position in other coins. You're not doing for real investments. And so what's not being audited is the actual risk that these protocols have, the financial risks, which could be much larger than the risk of the protocols having bugs.
Right.
Could you have a measure of the fragility of every DeFi provider and see if any of the financial risk is actually correlating to the code? And the side question here is, how do you explain that there's no audit whatsoever of the actual risk of the system, the financial risk of the system?
Sure. So that's an amazing suggestion. We definitely can look into it. What you're meaning here by DeFi on the, I think your example is about DeFi lending, right? Where you have borrowing lending. That's in a specific industry where perhaps we can measure the fragility, look into, I don't know, some correlations with with some of the systemic risks, for instance, could be one of the ideas. We actually have other projects looking into that, separated from auditing. But yeah, that's worth pursuing. Auditing does not solve all problems. Permit me to say auditing, meaning code review, does not solve all the problems. I do agree that some of the economic problems or the economic issues may be even first order than actually just the security or the coding itself. There's like a bad of what they call tokenomics, a lot of bad designs in the economic incentives of the players and so on, not only on the DeFi protocol level, but also at the blockchain level. But again, we're trying really to be narrower in terms of, we could talk about much more things in this paper, so we're trying to be more focused on that. But there will be follow-ups, and if anyone is interested in collaborating in that space, we are here. Thank you.
Travis and then Lisa. Travis.
Yeah, so I didn't know I wanted to use the term bounty hunter in a paper until now, so that's pretty cool. So I was thinking about the audit literature where I think generally we have the firm is engaging with the auditor. In this case, it would be the protocol. But I started wondering if the consumer, in this case, also can engage these bounty hunters. So, like, do you see, this is more of an institutional question. Do you see it's a little bit different than maybe a traditional audit where you have a big consumer, maybe an institution that's relying on this protocol, and they hire the bounty hunter? So anyway, I was just curious about,
Sure.
We focused on the protocol hiring.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, maybe I would want to look and do my own internal reviews or whatever. So I'd just be curious.
Definitely. So this is a very, very interesting question. Essentially, a bounty hunter can be anyone, including a consumer, or as Andreas put, could even be a hacker or somebody that wants to have access to your code. In the case of Cosmos and Aave, copy your code, right? So it could be anyone there. So there are some questions on kind of the fragilities that seeking this type of bounty hunting programs could induce to the particular DeFi teams. What we've seen, at least for these major platforms that we're taking the bounty hunting information from, those are like public available profiles, and most of these top, let's say, ranking bounty hunters, they are computer scientists and freelancers and engineers that are making some money on their free time. Why not, right? Find a bug and get paid for it. But I think your question is worth pursuing. We can look into it, maybe for anecdotes, see what's in there. But I guess my point is, as Andreas put, there's a lot of research questions in this setting that could be exploring one of these potential follow-ups or angles.
And I was mostly curious about, can a non-protocol individual or group hire, post on a bounty hunter platform for that protocol? Does that make sense? Or is it?
Is it led only the protocol will, because they have to give access to their smart contracts. Only the protocol will list on the bounty hunting platform. Whether the bounty hunters will have somebody with a different incentives, this is a different story. But yeah.
Lisa, and then Colin. Lisa, please.
Here. Very interesting paper. As
Thank
you already
you.
mentioned, this is kind of like a lot of institutional detail and a very super long paper already.
Right.
So if we think about the conceptual framework, like very simple conceptual framework, supply and the demand, what I like about your paper is actually this audit demand side. So it's kind of like under what conditions these protocols would demand for audits, and then what types of audits they demand for. And then after, you also have a very nice empirical analysis. For example, after the hacking incident, this is almost like the information revelation shock, and then how they demand for audits. What is more like differentiated quality of audit, right? Like top tier versus bottom tier, and also decentralized versus and centralized audit. This side, I think the audit demand side is super interesting, but the audit supply side, I think it's a little bit hard for your paper, because I know that you use several instrumental variable analysis. I'm pretty sure a lot of readers and audiences here can give some critiques. You also acknowledge that it's super hard. And also the goal would be very different, right? Kind of like the discussions that could be signaling, could be monitoring. It's not only about reducing the likelihood of breaches here. So the audit supply side, it would be very hard. Given that it's already very institutionally rich and interesting paper, so I would feel like if you focus on the audit demand side, and then dig into even more, adding some variable discussions suggested and some other feature would be super interesting, rather than also incorporating the audit supply side for just one scope of the paper.
Sure, definitely. That's something we can do. Yeah. Thank you.
And then Christina, Colin, please.
Hi.
Hey.
So I was curious, is it possible that you find that these audits seem ineffective because the real effect of it is on user demand and not security? Because in a sense, if these, because hackers are economic agents too, right? And so,
Right.
so if these
yes.
audits are sort of increasing, activity in TVL, perhaps it's sort of, the true counterfactual hazard is rising too.
That's correct. So I think that's a great point. I think if I understand your point is what you're saying is that if it's like a DeFi protocol which is weak or not super attractive, not running well, then it will not be hacked because the hackers have no economic incentives to go to that protocol. There's no money there for them to go after, right? So essentially the counterfactual or the baseline here, which is no audited, would have some. We should have to make some effort to bring it more closer to those protocols that are actually audit, right? In order to give away the portion that's unattractive for the hacker to go after, right?
Well,
so what we are doing, our attempt is, in the absence of model, and we need more analytical work in this space. We try to derive some sort of empirical determinants model where we can try to observe some of the riskiness characteristics of these protocols in their decision to engage with an auditor, so that when you go for matching the two groups, we know which characteristics we should match for, right? So this is kind of our attempt that we're doing here. I think this is the most we can do.
But do you know if after an audit there are simply more users of the blockchain? Like, is that?
Yes. There's definitely a literature. When we have some of the co-authors on those papers here, looking to whether a disclosure of auditing smart contracts affect total value locked, and there is some results positive there. And also, I don't know if Thomas Bourvau's here, but he also has a paper showing that, is market relevant for investors. So indeed, you're right, there is a positive impact, not only for users, but also for investors.
Christina and then Susie.
I'm right here.
Hi.
So I appreciate the use of the IV, the post-ChatGPT times GitHub interaction.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also quite confused by it. So I was hoping you could help me clarify something very basic, which is the exclusion restriction, which is that these protocols with GitHub are not differentially affected post-ChatGPT by hack outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it's going to affect code review, if AI tools are going to help affect code review, wouldn't those same AI tools help hackers detect bugs to hack? So it seems like the exclusion restriction shouldn't be satisfied, or am I missing something very basic here?
Okay, that's an excellent question. We have one of the tests, but probably on the appendix for the exclusion restriction, where you see whether there's an increasing number of hacking episodes and whether the hacking magnitude in terms of damaging total losses increase in the post-ChatGPT. We actually find no impact on that. Of course, exclusion restriction is always, one point where we could argue if you put a 3 empiricists in the room, they will have 4 opinions. But we try to test for exclusive restriction of that variable.
Why would ChatGPT help them detect bugs to review the code?
For the auditing team, you mean? We test that actually.
But not for hacks.
Yeah, so I got your argument. What I'm saying is we can argue on that, whether it would help also hackers to improve their hacking. Let me just would help the hackers to get better hacking tools in place. This, what you are saying. What I'm saying is, in terms of exclusion restriction, we check whether there is a positive impact in the number of hacks or whether the total loss of hacks increases. You will find no relation there, which does not suggest, at least empirically, that this is what is happening. Now, there are several vectors of hacking attacks. It's not just coding-based. And most of it could be, for instance, just manipulating some of the parameters of an oracle, as Andreas pointed out, which actually led also the Poly network $600 million loss, which is the major or massive systemic risks in this market. And that would not kind of be related to essentially using ChatGPT to try and find code, mistakes in the code or so. But yeah. We also use another shock, which is FBI, but which is not related to ChatGPT.
Susie.
Oh.
We're all together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my understanding of the market is it's evolving.
Oh, sorry.
If I could be wrong, but I believe that what you consider top-tier auditors in 2020 are probably different from what you consider as top-tier in 2025, just given
there's
the market is quickly evolving. And that made me wonder if there is any meaningful difference in the quality of audits between the auditors that you identify as top-tier versus not. And I'm raising this question because there's also concerns that these top-tier auditors just do superficial audits. So have you looked at whether there's a meaningful difference in the number of issues that they find or the length of reports that they release? Or
That's a fantastic suggestion. We had, in general, that they do find more vulnerabilities, and they do find more severe, given that they find vulnerabilities, do they find more severe vulnerabilities? But we can tabulate that. I think this is a fantastic suggestion. We can definitely do it. And there is a change on the top tiers towards the end. So we have in total, I believe, 6 main top tier auditors throughout the time, although one is persistent since the very beginning.
Yeah, okay, that will help a lot because you do find mixed evidence whether these have a meaningful impact on finding avoiding breaches and stuff.
Yeah.
And a related question I have is this more of a signaling story or actual investment in mitigating security risk?
Oh, I have that question too. So it's very difficult to separate both, right? So we try to separate both. In this paper, we are not testing the signaling story, which would be whether that affects users in terms of having more activity, as somebody mentioned, total value locked, and there are some papers that have been already published showing that there is a positive impact on users, and that could be the signaling part, right? I'm providing trust to my user or investors too. I'm providing a trust on assurance, so the investors and users will come to that protocol. So you're not directly testing the signaling part of it. We're a little bit more.
I was a bit puzzled by the fact that more than half of the protocols are not audited. So if it's a tool, then it just made me wonder why they don't do it.
Yeah. So this that's a great point. So this goes to back some point here on the kind of looking to. I think your colleague, I don't know, somebody mentioned this point on not reviewed auditing protocols, perhaps being of a different type, and we do some effort there with determinants model, trying to capture the characteristics again, trying to match them. But yeah, there are some limitations on what empirical work can do. Thank you, absolutely. We're going to do the tabulation of the vulnerabilities for sure.
Kristen and then Andrew and Buster.
I had the exact same reaction as Christina about the exclusion restriction.
Yeah.
And I don't think empirically you can really help with that because
That's true.
It's a counterfactual we don't observe.
I agree.
I did think what's useful about the paper is a lot of the descriptive evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could give more color as to what the procedures actually are in the audit that are complete, or the review, I guess, that are completed both for centralized audits and then for the decentralized bounty hunters, kind of looking at qualitatively, like what are the things that they do, and then maybe later in a different paper or in this one saying what's best, what set of procedures are best able to mitigate the hazard.
Sure.
Because I think that will really help policymakers as we try to catch them up on this timeline.
Definitely, that's a fantastic suggestion. We definitely will expand the discussion on what you suggested. Thank you.
One question. Andrew and Buster.
Hi.
You say that audits are there to make sure the code does what it's supposed to do. I think it's like
That's one of them, yeah.
Like for whom? Like is it the creator of the project who has an intention for what they think the code should do, or is it the users of the protocol? Or is it some third party who would say, in general, a protocol should operate like this? Like, what's the standard against which they're reviewing or auditing?
Sure. So when they're reviewing the codes, there's some logic that the team says, oh, this code should swap currencies, right? And then the auditors will stress test it and see whether that is actually happening or whether the code is just written in a bad quality, and then they will provide better, like some suggestions on how to improve the quality of the code. But it could also be, and that's where users are enter, it could also be that some of these developers could leave some backdoors intentionally in this coding so that, future, who knows who the hacker is, right? The hacker can be their own developer that participated in the development of the platform. So there's also kind of an assurance to this type of, what could be also very critical, would affect the user's assets. Because the users is actually those that get the blow when there's a hacking episode, right? So also to try to find those backdoors in whether they're there or just kind of, by mistake or something like that. So initially it could come in various flavors, right? It could be to make sure the code is doing exactly what it was designed for, but also it could be some components of bad quality code that could be improved, mistakes, and also some backdoors intentionally put by some of the developers that the protocol in general wants to avoid. All right, thank you. Thank you.